Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Brave Healing Podcast, where we are changing the world one brave word and vibe at a time. You guys, being brave most of the time just means showing up as your vulnerable, full-on self. I am Laura DeFranco, and I want you to know that your story has the power to heal you and the people listening to you. That fear of not good enough, it's boring, y'all, because what if the thing you're still a little afraid to share is exactly what someone needs to hear to change or even save their life? I'm excited, you guys, today because here to share a powerful story with you, I have Mr. Seth Washington, a writer producing portraits in poetic prose, notating real life voiced in gratitude, and a journalist sharing light about entities making positive impressions upon culture with a creative background that includes still photography, spoken word, and master of ceremonies. Washington's written words convey a visual eloquence that distinctively frames his storytelling. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you very much for having me, Laura. Good morning.
Good morning. And we're live on the business page on Facebook, which is a first time thing for me. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I hope you're, coming on live with us. You can definitely ask questions and we'll come back around later and answer them. You guys, after the show, please, I'll link you up, but you're going to find Seth on Facebook at Seth Washington Voice. Okay. So Seth, you heard me talk about stories healing. I really believe they heal the teller and the receiver. And so what's your story?
Well, my story began a few years back in New Jersey. And I like to say that I was born and raised in New Jersey, and then I grew up in DC. So what I mean is I went through my elementary and high school years in New Jersey in a beautiful town called Neptune, New Jersey. My father and my mother, along with my two sisters, we were blessed to be in a town that was what I would consider a very beautiful environment for growing up. And then I left New Jersey to come to Washington, D.C. to study communications at Howard University. And it was there that I say that I grew up as a man who, in the environment of Washington, D.C. in the 80s and the 90s, was experiencing life in a modern American city. And it was a very beautiful experience, and I enjoyed the atmosphere of the region called the DMV, as you know, as for DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so I decided to remain here, and I currently live in Maryland. And so artistically, I have enjoyed some wonderful experiences creatively. And I mentioned that because I believe that is greatly to do with why I've ended up here on your wonderful podcast. And in a very constructive way, it began to take shape in the early 90s when in the evenings and the weekends, I began to create still photographic images with a 35 millimeter film camera, if you all can recall film, and creating pictures of musical performers. There was a co-worker of mine who was the receptionist, and I was working in the mailroom, and we worked at a architectural firm. And she also was an amazing jazz singer. And her name is Natai Wright. And she invited me out to watch her performance. And of course, I brought my camera And from there, I began to photograph performers and musicians and so forth. And it continued for a period of about 10 years. And it went from there to doing portraiture, as well as weddings, and also street photography. And it was just a wonderful experience in seeing life from the perspective of an intentional observer and crafting images as such, but also learning about life from that perspective. You get invited to things when you have a camera, and you get invited, so to speak, behind the curtain when you have a camera. And so you see things, you hear certain conversations, and you learn more about this life. And so it was a great exploration that ironically led me also to writing. Now, I would just flash back that during those years growing up in Neptune, New Jersey, I was blessed to have a mother that was big on my sisters and I reading, including making sure that we had active library cards. And one of the other things that she also did was to make sure that we had a wealth of magazines around the house of different varieties. So to include Essence, Ebony, Time Magazine, National Geographic, and then my favorite was Sports Illustrated. And so there were in those magazines amazing photographs, but also the other amazing thing about those magazines were the captions that accompanied the photographs. And I would always read them to see if the caption accurately captured what was being conveyed in the image. And you know, one of the interesting things that if it wasn't, and if there was a bit of confusion or ambiguity in the caption, then I would be forced, Laura, to read the article. And but the bonus of that was all of those magazines had amazing writers. And so having to take the long road to read the article in order to find out what the photograph was all about, it was a part of my training as a writer. Little did I know. So coming back now to the modern era, little did I know also that photographing those performers and musicians and singers would be a part of my development as a spoken word artist, and how to be on stage and what that was like. And then even how to perform my spoken word with live musicians. And so life kept working in ways in getting me ready for the next thing based on the thing that I was doing at the time. And so with those, as I mentioned, those captions from the magazines, then sometimes the photographs that I took would inspire me to write a caption. And I would want them to be as great as the captions that I used to read as a child. And so I began to play more with words in that regard. And at a certain time, I no longer needed the imagery to inspire me. The words began to inspire me on their own. And so I began to create poems and more poems. And so from there, I was inspired to share those poems at open mics. My first open mic experience was at a place in Georgetown, a small, very hot little room in a place called It's Your Mug. And I went there once or twice, and it was a really joyful experience because, as you know, oftentimes at open mics, they are very encouraging for those who are doing it for the first time. And so it's a great place, a safe space for the fledgling writer and artist. And so from there, I had opportunities to perform at later on at Busboys and Poets, and many other places. The Variety Show, hosted by Tobal DeGrio. Also, Be Free Fridays in Baltimore, created by Love the Poet and hosted by Shelley Says So and Black Chakra, and just many other wonderful places. So at that point, then I'm performing and I'm writing more to have more things to perform. And what I was doing at that time in the preparation of performances was creating a structure of how to be ready and how to get my thoughts ready and how to get my energy ready. Well, what that became for me is a platform of creative readiness for now that I'm writing more. How to get my energy ready to create a body of work. And so from the photography to the spoken word and now back to the writing, all of that has been great preparation for me to pull wisdom from one art form and to better my abilities in the next art form.
I love it. Oh man, you said a couple of really amazing things, but the great one I caught early when you were talking about the Sports Illustrated and just the photography is you said you get invited to things when you have a camera.
Yes, you do.
I love that. And I can totally feel that backstage thing, right? And here you are with your camera and you get just that look that nobody else gets to see. And then you
Yes.
get to put your own personality and energy into what that shot is going to be, right? That's really cool.
Yes.
Really, really cool. So something else really important, I think you said, is you get your energy right as you're moving onto the stage. You get your energy right as you're sitting down to write words. I think it's all about that. So what a perfect way to talk about, you know, I've seen you say the power, beauty, and value of words, right? There is power and beauty and value and awareness and healing, so many things. I've seen that over my career, especially as a poet and a writer, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The written word was one level of that, and the spoken word, yet another level of that. So talk to me about how that's played out a little bit, especially as you've stepped on stage and spoken those words out loud.
Well, you know, poetry is all around us. And, you know, for me, it resonated a lot growing up in TV commercials. Coke
Really?
Coke adds life. Yes, Coke
Uh-huh.
adds life. It's the real thing. Nike, just do it. Those were all slogans that for me resonated as poetry, although they were used for a commercial purpose, but they were used to emote, just
Yes.
as we as poets use our words to emote. And although it's safe for when we're selling a book or something, we're not necessarily writing to emote for a purpose of purchase per se, but we are extending a concept about lifestyle. And so for me, one of the great icons for me of lifestyle continues to be the example of partnership that I saw in my parents, and that they continue to try to pursue effectiveness within the atmosphere of their marriage. And one of the things that was clear to me at a very young age was that they are different people. They're distinctive in who they are, and yet they attempt to, in the best ways, find togetherness, and you know, inclusive of healing when that was necessary, inclusive of togetherness with regard to raising children, even if on a particular idea they may not necessarily agree, but they would choose to compromise and to be as one in their leadership. And but also then in the real organic beauty of their friendship, they really liked each other as well as loved each other. And so from there, I grasped an understanding of the fact that you don't have to. We're not here on earth to agree on everything, but we are here to be ourselves in a way that is respectful of one another. And so a lot of that is a part of my poetry. You know, my parents, like anybody, they have their challenges individually and collectively. they continue to pursue and to push forward. And so my poetry was definitely inspired by that example. And so I try to convey that when I write, and then through my voice, hopefully convey the expectation of hope and the beauty that exists and that is there for our taking also in the future.
What beautiful words about your mom and dad. I love that. It's kind of a trick
Thank
question
you.
to ask a poet if they brought any poetry to share today. But if I were to ask you to
Yes.
lay one on us, would you like to? Do you have a couple pieces you might want to share today?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so what do you got for us? Let's do one now, and then we'll keep talking.
Okay. Now, Mom had my sisters and I also taking piano lessons when we were growing up. Now, I ended up learning that playing a musical instrument was really not effective for me. But the insights about music informs also my writing, because of course in poetry you have rhythm and you even have the melody of the words. And so it all works together. And so this poem is entitled Music. Music. The music was my first. Way back when, transistor to my ear, rock and roll anthems on AM dial. Piano lessons, piano teachers, introducing the classics. It's Bach, Beethoven, Joplin, first name Scott. Church choir rehearsals, gospel music left a positive imprint. School band was cool, still got my trumpet, though now it's on display, not so much for play. And there were these two girls around the way, always knowing all the words, my first introduction into the power of the lyric. I mean, every song on the R&B soul album, it was something how they were hyped about it. It's kind of nice, reflecting. Music, music, music.
I'll snap a couple times. Can you guys hear these snaps in the microphone? Thank you for that. So listeners, if you're watching, if you're listening, one of the things I've absolutely loved about interviewing poets is the conversation is one thing and the words sound poetic, but then when you ask the poet to do the poetry, this is why I always say poetry turns me on, because your voice changed and you stepped into poet, right?
Okay.
And I don't even know if poets get, like, if they hear it themselves, but thank you. I always feel like those are gifts. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So what do you mean by words connect the seen and unseen?
Well, so let's look at the stop sign. That's one of our greatest, most profound poems that exists, right? It's this red emblem, and we know what it means, and then we do something. So it means something, which is something on the inside. But as a result, then it causes us to do something, which is with our foot, right? And our vehicle. And so that's a very simple thing of that connectivity. It's kind of a silent spoken word that's performing for us. But as a result, you know, we're not finger snapping, but we're foot tapping. And so it's an example of how that insight is now producing activity. Or that insight is manifesting some way in the physical realm. And so, you know, poetry is all around us. It really is beyond just what we consider to be poems. So, for example, the founding principles of our country, that also is poetry. I mean, think about why we write poems. Because of how we feel. Well, the people who craft law and legislation, they are committed to that because of how they feel. And so they're putting that prose together for a purpose also, which is inclusive of emoting. They would like for you to feel as they feel, but they also are connecting the unseen to the seen because they see clearly why they want this and what it will produce. And so in truth, poetry is we are surrounded by poetry. We are surrounded by, in other words, philosophies. And so we oftentimes are drawn to create poems, to bring clarity for ourselves about our philosophies. But there are also those among us who are clear on the power of philosophy, and as such are committed to making it broad ranging in a way that impacts all of us. So that also is a part of the bringing the unseen into the connecting the seen with the unseen. And so I think also that as recognized artists of words, we are also then bringing forth laws, first about ourselves, but then precepts that we hope others will at least hear and consider. Even though perhaps in our truth and our belief in fairness, we also give safe space in some things for others maybe not to agree with us and to still walk in that freedom, whereas others who are actually producing real legal concepts are not necessarily always giving that space.
Safe space is really important. And as a just in the healer world and the healing world, you know, I'm just one of those people who believes everybody is a healer. It's just up to you to show up in that kind of energy and awareness or not. You're either showing up to the stuff of your life with some awareness of your energy and how it affects other people, or you just aren't conscious of that, you know? So we are all we are all healers, but holding a safe space for expression is foundational, right? And including that respect. And you're making me think of what you talked about just now is an incredibly powerful idea. It's almost scary powerful if you really think about if you can move somebody. I'm thinking of your stop sign. If you can create something that then moves people, literally makes them do something, this can be very wonderful or very not so wonderful.
Yes, right.
So it's incredibly powerful. And I appreciate you creating wonderful things from your words.
Well, thank you. I think that in that regard, when you think of those sides of power that you mentioned, so then you have also then, or with that, I think of two things. I think of wholeness on one side, and then on the other side, I think of leverage on the other side. And so, you know, the key is, what is your intention? Are you creating this that we're all more likely to be whole? Or are you creating this that you may have leverage over others? And so I think of those things, as you say, you know, the two sides of that power. And, you know, I like to think that the poet is really more so coming from the place of wholeness. The recognized artist, in other words, who is writing poetry under the definition of poetry, is attempting to first find wholeness within themselves by facing the energy of the collective words that are swirling within himself, herself. And And then on the other side, with those who create the poetry of policy, at least historically, it appears that they've been attempting to have leverage over others. And so there is that, that kind of conflict of words. And so one is attempting to bring about effectiveness for everyone, and the other has, at least historically, attempted to bring about an advantage for some. And but as you say, both of them are operating from a base that can be very powerful. Now, oftentimes the art form of poems comes in the aftermath of the attempt at leverage. And so as a result of the pain that is produced from the poetry of leverage, then comes the art form of healing. And in the aftermath of what is produced over time, when, you know, bad principles are in play that create, say, bad collective habits in society. And then even when the rule is changed to be better and to create wholeness, but the habits are already in play and they're not as easily to change. You know, it's like changing an eating habit. And you as a brave healer know that for whatever you heal from, it takes time. Even as you change your intention in your mind, that can be done in an instant. But now changing the behavior and is inclusive of changing an entire catalog of words that you formerly utilized and replacing them or reorganizing those words in such a way that now, instead of promoting leverage of, say, your emotions over your body, you promote wholeness where your emotions now complement the workings of your body. Even as an individual, we've created laws inside of ourselves that either work for us or leverage part of us against ourselves. And so we have to use those words now to promote wellness from within. And anybody who has been on a mission to, say, maybe be physically better healthy, they know the reality of what I'm talking about. And I think we've all been there on some level, you know what I mean? Yeah. And in healing, as we talk about the self-talk, then, you know, it's all about words and it's all about the inside poetry first, Laura.
Definitely it is. Oh my goodness. Do you have a book yet, Seth?
Not yet. I am working on one.
Okay, how'd I know?
Yeah.
And if you guys see me looking down over here, it's because I'm just one of those people, and much like Seth, I can feel the words. And so sometimes I'll scribble down something that he said or whatever. But what I just wrote down a minute ago was the poetry of leverage can turn into the poetry of healing. And I'm in love with the idea that the leverage is poetry also. It's like that, it's that whole thing of, if you're judging your now moment as good or bad, it's probably best not to judge it at all, just to see it as an opportunity or move into the possibility of that moment, rather than automatically thinking it's the bad one. You know, and you just talked about that beautifully when you said, you know, even the poetry of leverage can be an opportunity for the healing. And so that's a really aware perspective that I think is important, incredibly important right now. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yes, you know, words create connectivity. They also create boundaries.
Yeah.
So a basic example of words connecting or creating boundaries, us creates kind of connectivity. Them creates kind of boundaries. Ironically, small children organically seem to see connectivity. And they are taught and trained to see boundaries, just as fences are built. Now, fortunately, we know also that fences can be removed. And so that's, I think, an example of how we can choose different directions, and we don't have to stay rooted in one direction. Mm. And I think that is also the power of words. We, again, in our self-talk, we can change our private policies and our private poetry, and begin to speak life that may be, again, promoting wholeness. And I think in our larger society, we're certainly seeing a call for that change, that our poetry as a society must change. And it's a lot to do with our self-talk as groups, as families, as individuals. And even as laws have, even in some cases, been changed many years ago, but it takes a while for the power of laws of leverage, and once they take hold, they create cultural activity and cultural norms that it's like trying to then, even after the laws change, it's like trying to remove a stain from clothing. And it's not always easy to do, because as my dad would say, he said, son, habits are hard to break. Create good ones.
Now that is a brilliant quote.
Yes. And he's so right about that. And then, as we get older, we're like, man, I wish, I had really took hold of that, when I was younger, because it is true. There's a real serious mathematics behind that.
Yes, there is. When you say we must fight harder to listen, what are we fighting? What are you talking about?
Well, I am fighting harder every day to listen, because it is in listening that, Laura, I will hear you. And that's it. If I don't listen to you, I will not hear you. And so if I don't hear you, then I have less of a chance of connecting with you in a way that is effective for both of us.
How do you?
If I'm not listening to you, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, this is a really amazing topic, and it's another foundation of healing.
Yes.
So how can we be better listeners?
Well, just do it. There it is at the beginning and the end. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so shout out to Nike, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, you shot Nike out twice today. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. But so as a side note, one of the reasons why they are so profound in the marketplace is because they connected poetry to lifestyle.
Yes, you're right.
And so it was a really forward-thinking kind of way to do it. And so for us now, then, if I'm listening to you, I'm getting a sense of not just who you are, but of how you live. And if I'm taking into consideration how you live, then I have a better appreciation of how I need to move when we're together, or even when we're not together, because I have an understanding of your being, and
Yes.
and that you hold space in this existence, as do I. If I don't listen, it is very easy then for me to not recognize that you hold valuable space, as do I. And so, in other words, we have to let, to some degree, the poetry of everybody to be a part of our own, even as we continue on our path. But we have to know that there are other verses out here, not just our own. But if we're not, and in fact, if we just even let a little bit of that imprint of other verses come into our own, we actually unconsciously will augment our behavior in a way that's effective. We don't really even have to be as conscious about it. We will move with greater effectiveness. So it's kind of like, if we've been in an argument before, if you've been in an argument before, and at that point you say, I'm not listening to you anymore, then that means that's a real serious thing. Even though when we do it, we don't necessarily understand that, or we're not necessarily trying to be totally vicious, but it is a very vicious thing to say we are not listening anymore. Because now we're saying at this moment, that element of humanity does not matter to us. So that's the opposite then, effect of listening. We're no longer taking into consideration of those things. We have decided, we have judged in that moment that those things are of no value. And that is a real serious thing to say, and ironically, it's amongst loved ones where that's said most most often. And although again, I think we don't necessarily intend viciousness when we've done that, but it really is serious.
And I think people you love the most, you end up saying that the most. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. It is the worst kind of spoken word.
Exactly. Listening, it gives you perspective. I mean, we're all walking around with our own unique lenses, filters, and lenses that we've had because we've had experiences. And so the minute you don't listen, you don't get a new perspective. So turning that, when you listen, that opens, it cracks it open just a little wider.
Yes.
And I like that idea because I'm interested in that wider lens. I'm interested in a less dense filter. I want to understand it,
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's a way of traveling too.
Yes.
And if we are listening more, we're experiencing other cultures. We all individually represent our own culture within. And there's a lot going on the inside. Like the man at the circus says, step right up. It's all on the inside. And there's some truth to that, where science has said there are within us 37 trillion cells is what our body is composed of. So each of us that we see walking around, we see as this one entity, but no, they're composed of 37 trillion parts. So if we listen to one another more, we can show each other things that are amazing.
No doubt. So, okay, so I'm gonna, y'all are listening to Seth, and he's an amazing poet and an amazing speaker, and he speaks with a certain level of awareness and presence. And this is a little bit random. We had written, we wrote a few notes, for the show today, and you said that you like Toastmasters. And I was like, whoa, he likes Toastmasters? So if I am somebody who wants to learn and practice, I'm assuming this is a place you would recommend. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is an awesome circumstance, because to your initial question about listening, one of the things that you learn to do at Toastmasters is listen.
Okay.
So that you listen for, as we were talking about earlier, the pauses. Now, in speaking, as you mentioned, that there are, before we started, you mentioned that you'll be listening for the pauses, and that's important. And then in Toastmasters, you listen for the pauses that should happen during the speech, but then the extent or length of those pauses that should not happen. You listen for the ums and the ahs. In fact, those things are even, they're counted. How many pauses or ineffective pauses or ums and ahs and so forth. So you are trained to hear better. Now, these are done not to cast negative vibration at the speaker, but so that you can have a sense for yourself. Are you doing these things?
Yes.
And so the feedback also about these things is given to the speaker, not again to chide them, but to alert them that this is, a very active part of their speech, and give them tips on how to eliminate them. So that's one thing that I think is important about Toastmasters. That is a brilliant aspect of it. The other piece is, Laura, at the age of around 2, we do something that is pretty amazing. We do a couple of things around that age that's pretty amazing. We begin to articulate words. So the first word that is hope that the baby will say mama.
Of course.
And so what is amazing about that is, in the process of speaking and articulation, 80% of that activity is unseen.
Mm.
Pushing air from the lungs through the vocal cords, thinking about what you're going to say, and then fashioning your tongue, your teeth, and your jaws and your lips to form that word. The overwhelming majority of that process is unseen. So the fact that the 2-year-old can duplicate a process that they don't see, and that is one of the most complex things that we do. One of the true multitasking things that we do is to talk. Then the fact that we ourselves train ourselves to do that at 2 speaks to kind of how incredible we are, even as soon as we come out of the womb. Now, one of the other things that we do at that same time that's also amazing. Now, gravity, as you know, is perhaps one of the main forces on Earth that is turned on 24 hours a day. It apparently does not sleep or take holidays. Yet at the age of 2, we say, okay, gravity, cool. You do your thing, but I'm going to stand and I'm going to walk. So very early in life, we take ownership of some incredible tools. And not the least of them is the power to speak, which is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, connector of human beings, our voice. So that we do that so early in life, but then we go to school, and I would ask anybody, you and anyone listening today, in that first 12 years, how much training did we get on the usage of that incredible tool called speaking?
Hardly any.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and then,
I do.
And conversely, what about the other ancillary aspect of speaking? Listening. Where has our training been on these? These tools mean everything to us in a society, and yet we really have still been left to train ourselves. And so Toastmasters, even for someone like me who never really has been shy about speaking publicly, but it helped me. in the areas of listening, but also in understanding the power of words even more, and understanding the ability to be effective as a speaker, and the ability to appreciate others who also are speaking. So, and I recommend it to anyone, even if you're never going to do public speaking, it's going to help you in your relationships, because the tenor and tone and effectiveness of every relationship that we have is impacted by our communication ability. So whether it's personal, professional, parent-child, stranger, being able to handle your vocal abilities elevates your effectiveness in life, no matter what your chosen path.
Beautiful. I had never thought about that in terms of just an everyday life kind of skill, meaning to seek that training out for that purpose versus a professional purpose. How beautiful. What a wonderful message to everybody listening, whether or not you want to step on a stage with a microphone in your face or not, right?
Right.
I love that. I love that, Seth. So I would love to close out today with a poem, if you have another one to share. But before that, is there any last message you want to share with our listeners about words, about voice, before we head out with a poem?
Well, I would say that, again, we're all poets. We're creating poems in the way that we walk out life, and in the way that we share our principles and our philosophies. And my dad was a poet, but he did not write. But he did spoken word every day, in the way he would say things and the way he would put out his principles. Very poetic in that regard. And so it is a very important aspect of our lives. One of the things that I've liked about listening to people who are very, very, very good at what they do is that they have a poetry about how they talk about what they do. There was just a very amazing documentary done on Michael Jordan called The Last Dance. And of course, it was a 10-part series. And a lot of those moments, he was able to sit and reflect on them. And if you notice, he spoke very poetically in those reflections. And so it's important for us to get to the poetry that's within us about every aspect of our life. And from that point, we can begin to have wholeness. We can begin to assess whether some of our philosophies have been about wholeness or leverage. Our body will tell us the truth. And it's not about judgment, it's about analyzing for greater effectiveness. And so I think that there is wonderful power in words, there's wonderful power in poetry. And we should take that just a little bit more serious and use it to bring about the things in life that we know are necessary. Our word game is key to that.
You're going to make my hand cramp today with all this writing I want to do now. Oh my goodness, you guys. It's important to get to the poetry we have within us.
Yes.
Yes, yes, and more yes to that.
Yes, yes.
Do you have one more poem you'd like to share with us?
Sure.
I know I kind of put you on the spot because I didn't warn you ahead of time about grabbing some poems, but you know.
No, it's fine. It's fine. The daydream may seem esteemed, yet the dream of the true visionary becomes legendary. wake up and dream. To God be the glory.
Nice. That's a perfect way to finish this show, Seth Washington. You guys, we're live on Facebook right now, and you are going to find Seth at Seth Washington Voice. And we're going to be on YouTube a little bit later. So, you know, share this interview out with your friends, please, and spread the poetry love. Seth, thank you so much for what you're doing in the world and for being here today to share it with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for what you're doing in the world, and you know, continued success to you and the Brave Healing podcast.
Thank you. Everybody, lastly, just today, something to remember. You were born, so you are worthy. Your message matters. What if the thing you're still a little afraid to share is exactly what someone needs to hear to change or even save their life? It's time to be brave. See you next time, you guys.
Thank you.